So we're looking at picture 39 here. So can you tell us what we're looking at here?
We're looking at me and Bobby in front of the granary, and there are a few chickens.
So Bobby was your
Younger. He's 2 years younger than me.
And tell us all the names of the sisters.
What?
Tell us all the names of the rest of the sisters. How much older they were than you, or younger, everything.
All of them?
Yeah.
Well, Agnes was the oldest, and then Mildred, Esther, Ruth, Hilda, June, myself, and Bobby.
Okay, wow, that's great. And how old do you think you are in this picture right here?
Oh, I'd say I don't think I'd started school yet. I would say about 4 or so.
You're about 4 years old. And so when did you start going to school?
When I was 4.
You started going when you were 4.
Yeah, went into the first grade at age 4.
First grade.
The only reason I started that early was that Miss Larson, the teacher who had been teaching all the rest for several years, she was going to get married, and she was only teaching one more year, so she wanted me in her class.
So she knew about you because your other brothers and sisters, your other sisters had been to school.
Mm-hmm.
So let me understand this. When your family first got to Minnesota, they mostly spoke Swedish, right?
Well, they understood English. They had learned English in New York. My father had learned, on board ships, had learned English, but sometimes he used Irish terminology like meself and different things that the Irish. And my mother, she actually learned English as a housemaid. And, they'd point out things for her to do, and of course she missed reading, so she would learn to read using the Sunday paper or the comic strips, because that'd help her. So she was able to read by then.
But
so they always had a newspaper.
But at your house, before you were born, like when you just had the older sisters, did they speak Swedish at the house?
Well,
speak English?
Agnes and Mildred did quite a bit. Mildred spoke quite good English, Swedish, and when they went to confirmation at the Lutheran Church, they were confirmed with the biblical things in Swedish, because at the church they had a Swedish service once a month, which we usually went to, so they spoke it. But by the time I and June and Bob came along, we spoke very little Swedish. We understood it, but we never spoke it.
I see. When your parents talked to each other, would they speak it? When your parents talked to each other, would they speak in Swedish or in English?
It depended.
I see. And so,
I mean, they'd use Swedish expressions,
I see. And so maybe tell us a little bit about the school that you went to. What was it like?
It was a one-room school with all 8 grades, and there were 2 or 3 in each class, and it was They had the desks, the small ones for the little kids and larger ones for the bigger ones. And we it was heated by a big iron stove, which had a sort of a jacket around it so the heat would go all over the room. And during the recesses, we'd have make-up games and played a lot of baseball during the nice weather, and during the winter we play certain games in the snow, like fox and geese, and where we'd make up, sort of a triangle thing or a circular thing, and we'd try to catch each other and that sort of thing. And by the time we were in the upper grades, we used to. Bobby got a pair of skis from Ruth and Hilder, I guess, and so we would ski, but there were no hills. But fortunately, there was a railroad that was planning to build near the school. But they had apparently gone bankrupt. But they had built up the sides, so we could ski down them.
I see. And how far was it from where you lived to where the school was?
About a mile.
I see. And what time did school start and end?
What?
What time did school start and what time did it
the
end?
bell would ring at 9 o'clock, and we would be there till 4 o'clock.
I see. So you'd bring your lunch along with you?
Yes. Usually, it was just a sandwich and some fruit, but sometimes during the winter we would have a hot lunch, and then you would bring a jar with usually what was left from the night before, like chicken or roast beef or something, and the teacher would put a pan of water on top of the stove, and then it would heat during the morning session, so it would be a hot lunch.
Oh, I see. Wow, that's great. And was there running water at the school?
No, we had a pump, and they usually had a sort of a janitor or someone that came in and built the fire and the stove before school, and they would usually fill the drinking fountain with water.
I see. And the same at your house, right? No running water. You had a pump too, right?
Yeah.
Wow. So how did it work? The teacher would teach all the grades at the same time?
She would have a schedule. She spent so many minutes with each grade. And each subject, like 10 minutes with history and math and various subjects. And then you'd do your homework while the others were having their class. But I wasn't very interested in the type of thing I was supposed to learn, but I would listen to the history and the geography and in the health. And when I came home from school, I would give the whole lesson to my mother.
I see. So you would, instead of doing your work, you would listen to the other grades.
And when I was older, I mean, like in 7th and 8th grade, I read all the library books. We had a pretty good library for a small school, all the classic, Dickens and... Yeah. So I loved to read, and I read everything.
Wow.
And I also loved the encyclopedia. I mean, there was so much to look at and read.
And did you get any homework ever?
We never had homework. The teachers then believed that if after you spent that much time in school, there's no reason for you to do it anymore.
I see. Did you have tests and things?
What?
Did you have exams or tests?
The only exams we had was in 8th grade. They had the state board where you had, history and mathematics and English, and you had to pass that to graduate.
I see. And everybody passed?
What?
And everybody passed?
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I heard you had trouble during your first year of school?
Trouble?
Well, that you were too young or something?
Well, Mama didn't think I was learning to read well enough.
When you were 4 years old?
Yeah. So she thought they should keep me back. And besides, the lower grades had 2 other girls, where the one I was in was 3 boys. She thought it'd be better if I was with the girls.
Right. And you were also born in November, so you were probably you were young for your grade too, for school, right? I guess that all makes sense. So you flunked first grade.
What?
You flunked first grade.
No, it was 2nd grade.
Oh, 2nd grade. Okay.
That she decided I should repeat.
Oh, I see. Okay. And so what was it like going back and forth to school? Did you walk or?
Oh, yes. Some of the kids had parents that took them in the sled in the winter, but we always walked. And when we got the skis, Bobby and I would take turns. Between each telephone post, I would ski, and then I'd leave the skis, and he'd catch up, and it was sort of this relay thing till we got there. And going home from school, we always went down by the creek, which ran on the farm near the school, and sort of loitered, wandered around in the woods there. And so it took us a long, we were in no hurry to get home.
I see. And what was it like when it was bad weather and you had to walk to school?
Well, after a great big snow, Papa would take us, we'd take a shortcut across the lake, and he would go ahead and sort of make tracks that we were supposed to follow. But he took such big steps that it didn't do any good. I mean, you still went up to your hips practically every step.
Oh, really? So the old story about having to walk to school in the snow was true for you.
Huh?
The story, the famous story about having to walk to school in the snow was actually true for you.
Oh, yes.
So how warm and how cold was it?
Well, now this last week in Minnesota, it was below zero in the middle of the day and 20 below at night. But it wasn't always that cold. I mean, these were regular storms, and sometimes there'd be a lot of snow, and sometimes there wasn't. I mean, it's sort of, you know how weather is.
Right. So it would vary. But how many months out of the year would it be wintry or snowy?
Well, the winter would start in November until, around April it began to thaw. But there would be periods when there was no snow. I mean, there was snow on the ground, but it wasn't snowing. We had trouble when it was a heavy snowstorm to get to town, because we had to go to town every week with at that time we were selling the cream and the eggs, so Papa would hitch the horses in front of the car and pull it down to the road, because our half mile to the main road where the snowplows went, but our road was not a county road. I mean, so the snowplow never came, so we had to just make do with what we had.
So, do you remember any of your friends from school, the other kids?
Oh, yes. We went to high school together.
So you remember them from all that time?
And later when I started working, and they were working, at least one of them, we would meet everyone. She was working in Minneapolis, and I was in St. Paul. Like when the state fair was, we would meet, and we'd also, when we took the bus from Stacy to St. Paul and Minneapolis, we'd quite often be on the same bus.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned cows. I didn't hear before that you had cows.
Cows?
Cows, yes.
Oh, yes. We had about a dozen of them. And in the summer, we would take them to the pasture, but to get to the pasture, it was maybe a quarter mile from the house that we would. There was a road, and you couldn't close the road, so you had to put the logs on the side of the road and let the cows through, and then close the gates.
Oh, I see.
And then same at night. You had to go and get the cows. But normally they would be there waiting to go home. But sometimes if it was calves or something, she would not come. So then we'd have to go looking for her with the wheelbarrow so we could haul the calf home and get her home.
And then whose job was it to milk the cows?
Huh?
Did you get milk from the cows?
Oh, yes. We got we had a lot of we had a 5-gallon container. We have a couple of those, and But then we used to separate the milk. We had a separator, and we would just sell the cream. But then, as I got a little older, they got a milk truck, so they came and picked up the milk. But they picked up the whole milk, not just the cream.
I see.
And then at the creamery, they made ice cream, and it was called non-butter, and it really was wonderful ice cream.
Sounds good. Whose job was it to milk the cows?
Mom and Papa did. June did a little, but I never did.
I see.
They were milking the cows at night. We would wash the dishes and clean up the kitchen, that sort of thing.
Oh, I see. So, what were some of your best memories as a kid growing up? Things that you liked to do?
Well, I kind of liked to walk in the woods, and I also liked when I was herding the cows during dry seasons and we had them out in the pastures. I would read, and in the summer we'd go swimming and in the river, and the whole family would go. We'd take the car to a place where it was, a good bottom and so forth. And during the winter, we would we would ski, usually behind the sleigh. In other words, you had a rope and you skied just cross-country skiing.
I see.
And then we had sleds, and we'd go down to the river bank and go down this down the hill, during the glacier period. That had been big river, so there were high banks all around, but now the river was small, but it was much lower than the regular land. And also we would ski on the not the haystacks, but the straw stacks. And I used to wish we had some hills.
Sounds good. So how far were you from the nearest town, and what was the name of the town?
Well, we were about 6 miles from North Branch and about 6 miles from Lindstrom's. We were right in between. And then there was a little town about 4 miles, which was called Cost, but all that had was a church and maybe a store. It wasn't a big town. And I was trying to think. Then there was Stacy, which was closer than North Branch, and that's where we'd get off the bus when we took it from the Twin Cities. And later on, when I was more grown, I would get off the bus and walk to home.
I see. And when was the first time that you actually went to a big city?
Well, I went to visit with Ruth and Hilder and June. But we always went to the state fair in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, and
and
then Ruth was working at Sears and Roebuck. That was a big mail house store. We'd go maybe once a year, and they'd buy like paint and linoleums, things you couldn't find in the little towns, or it was cheaper.
I see.
And as far as clothing, Mama sewed all our, except for shoes and socks and things like that. And then when I was about 9 or 10, we got a new car. It was a Plymouth, and it was really, I was quite impressed with it.
What was the car before the Plymouth? What kind of car did you have before the Plymouth?
It had a Dort, one of these open, with the canvas tops. But the Papa bought the car at the state fair, but we had to go to Cambridge, or another town. It was further than North Branch, and he'd take the car in to have it serviced, lubricated and stuff, and and Bobby and I would always go along, and Mama would also buy yarn for knitting there, because they had a mill that produced yarn. And I can remember it was quite a treat. We'd go to the restaurant and have donuts and coffee. At home in the summer, we would go to Lindstrom in the evening instead of in the daytime, and they'd do the shopping, and then they always had a band concert in the park, and we'd always get ice cream cones.
So this new Plymouth, this was the Plymouth, was that a new car? Or?
Oh, yeah, it was it was made quite a sensation, because everybody else had a Model T Ford,
Oh, I see. So you had a brand new Plymouth.
Yeah.
But you didn't have a truck or anything like that?
No, but the neighbors, they all had. So, they did a lot of exchanging things. Like one neighbor had a sawing machine, a motorized saw, so they could saw up the wood, and they had. We had threshers. One had a threshing rig that he went around the neighborhood with, and all the neighbors would come and help, take the grain into the granary, and they'd have a big dinner, dinner or noon, and my Mama would be cooking like mad.
Sounds good. So, can you tell us a little bit about the early lives of your sisters?
What?
Can you tell us a little bit about the early lives of your sisters? Were they similar to you, and what did they do once they finished school?
Well, well, Agnes was the oldest, and they were going to have, she was going to go to high school. So they they arranged a place for her to stay, room and board. But she only went the 1 year, and Mildred and Esther didn't go to high school at all. But then when Ruth and Hilda came along, Agnes was married and living in Stillwater, so they stayed with her, and they also worked a little for the room and board once they got settled there.
So it was Agnes that first moved to Stillwater.
Yeah.
And that's because her husband was there?
What?
That's where she met her husband, or that's where her husband was? Or?
Well, I don't know where I guess she met him in St. Paul when she was working.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then what about the other, your other sisters and brothers?
Well, Mildred, she worked as a sort of a nurse for in a well-to-do family. The Butlers, in fact, the grandfather was a Supreme Court justice, and this little boy had diabetes, quite badly, so they needed a full-time nurse for him. And, they had to measure the amount of food he eat and everything. And then she got Esther to come to work there, too. Esther was the cook, and Mildred was the nursemaid.
I see. And what about your other...
Well, Ruth and Hilda, well, they did. There was no work in those days. That was during the Depression. But they had studied business in high school. I mean, they learned shorthand and typing and all that. But they never could they couldn't get a job. But then things began to pick up there before the war. And Ruth worked at Montgomery Ward's in the audit department. In fact, she would go to Chicago and audit the books there. And Hilda was got a job at Brown and Bigelow's from her employer, and then she was transferred to New York, so she worked there.
Is this a picture of the new car?
Yeah. No. This was my uncle's car from New York. That was before we got ours. They drove from New York to Minnesota and stayed for about, a week or so. And that was their car.
I see. And that's you and Bobby next to the car. So this is picture 37 here. What's that?
Oh, this was my high school graduation.
Already graduated from high school. Wow. Mm-hmm. So where did you go to high school?
North Branch. That's where June went also. And when it was time for me to go, I'd graduated from 8th grade, the superintendent came and visited, and by that time they had bus service for the students, but you had to pay for it. So he said they would have a job for me at school. So I worked at school during lunch hours and after school. We always stayed an hour after school before the bus took us home. Mainly the boys would play basketball and practice, and they had band leader, all sorts of extra curriculum activities during that hour.
I see. And what kind of work did you do?
Huh?
What work did you do?
Oh, I had to go around to every teacher and pick up the attendance, and I would arrange when the new magazines came in to put them in the folders, and then I would record on permanent cards the grades of each child.
I see. And was it unusual that you got this job, or?
Well, I was the only one in the school that worked for them. I mean, as far as...
I see. Right. But there were other kids that came from your neighborhood, right?
Well, yeah, but they had more money.
Oh, I see. Okay. Your family spent all your money on your new car? Is that?
No. Well, but I mean, it just seemed natural that we should work for ourselves,
I see. And what was it like at high school?
Oh, it was a nice school. It was in North Branch. They had the elementary classes downstairs, and upstairs they had the high school, and they had a gymnasium, and we'd have
You had a
with
gymnasium?
lyceum programs, where speakers would come and present programs, and of course we had basketball games at night. In those nights that we had home games, the bus wouldn't go home till after the game, so you had to stay. And you had to you had from from 4:00 till 8:00, nothing to do, but wait. But we'd play. They had Chinese checkers and cards and things, and magazines.
I see. And what did you learn in high school? What sort of things did they teach you?
Well, you could either take a business course or you could take college preparation. And college preparation, you took geometry and algebra and political science. I mean, just regular. Everybody had to take English and history, and well, that's about. Yeah, I mean,
and
there were about. Ours was the biggest class they'd ever had. We started out with 80 students, and so we had 2 sessions. I mean, you'd have one class of 40 and another class later with 40.
I see, but you would always be in a class all day, right?
What?
You're always in one class or another all day.
Well, you had 1 hour study period.
Okay. And what sort of sports did you play?
I was never athletic, but on Friday afternoons we would play basketball.
So you played basketball.
Yeah. Well, we played girls basketball.
And what was the difference between girls basketball and boys basketball?
You didn't run the whole length of the court. I mean, it was halfway.
Half court.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but when we had gym every day, but there we'd mainly play volleyball and shuffleboard and things like that.
So at that time you still lived at home.
Yeah.
And you would take the bus to school.
Mm-hmm.
And did you do anything else besides just go to school?
Well, that took almost, by the time you got home after 5 o'clock, I mean, there wasn't much time for anything. You'd have supper, and then we'd all sit around the table, and sometimes I'd have some geometry to do or something, or we'd read.
Mm-hmm.
Or listen to the radio.
All right. And what did you do on weekends?
Well, usually it was cleaning, and I would sew most of my clothes, and wash your hair, take a bath. I mean, all those things.
You had time off on the summer, though, right?
Oh, yes.
What did you do during the summers?
Well, in the morning, you'd go out in the garden and pick the peas or the beans or whatever, dig up some potatoes, and you'd pick the rhubarb and strawberries and that sort of thing. And usually you would bring water for the chickens, the baby chicks especially. And then we used to have some veal calves, so you'd bring them milk. They, be tied up outside.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd pump water. You had to pump all this water for the cows, in the winter, because they couldn't go to the river.
I see.
And then we had to, have to bring the water in the house. And also you have to bring the wood in for the stove.
I see. So between taking care of everything you needed to do and going to school, you were pretty much busy the whole time.
Yes.
So there wasn't much time to do anything extra, I guess.
No.
Very interesting. And so your brother Bobby, he was also going to high school at the same time?
Yeah, he's 2 years younger, but he was no student.
Oh, really? Were you a good student?
Oh, I was an A student. I was on the honor roll always.